Maxwell was among Epstein's closest associates and helped him exploit girls who were as young as 14 years old. Maxwell played a critical role in helping Epstein to identify, befriend, and groom minor victims for abuse. In some cases, Maxwell participated in the abuse herself. As alleged, Maxwell and Epstein had a method. Typically, they would befriend these young girls by asking them questions about their lives, pretending to be taking an interest in them. They would take them to the movies and treat them to shopping trips. Maxwell would encourage these young girls to accept offers from Epstein to pay for their travel and their education, making these young victims feel indebted to Jeffrey Epstein. After developing a rapport with the victims, Maxwell then tried to normalize sexual abuse with a minor victim through a process known as grooming. For example, Maxwell would discuss sexual topics with the victim and undress in front of the victim, or be present for sex acts involving the minor victims and Epstein. Maxwell's presence as an adult woman helped put the victims at ease. As Maxwell and Epstein intended, this grooming process left the minor victims susceptible to sexual abuse.
Welcome to Law and Crime Report, everybody. I'm Jesse Weber, and that was the U.S. Attorney, the acting U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York this past summer announcing the charges against Ghislaine Maxwell. And the hits keep on coming for Maxwell, who is the accused collaborator in Jeffrey Epstein's alleged child sex trafficking ring. Despite Maxwell offering an enormous bond package of $22.5 million, a federal judge has denied her second attempt to get out of jail. Maxwell even proposed having an electronic monitor on her and to be guarded by armed personnel, but Judge Allison Nathan said no. And so I want to talk about this. Joining me is Anna Yum, criminal defense attorney, and law and crime legal analyst Jean Rossi. Anna, Jean, I'm happy to have you both here. Jean, I'll start with you. You know, were you surprised by this? Because you don't usually see $22.5 million being put up to get someone out of jail. What do you think about that?
I think that's a record. I think Bernie Madoff put up $12 million, and then he got out on bond, and then he blew his bond conditions. But $22 million is extraordinary, but it means nothing, and here's why. She had 12 bank accounts, 3 passports. She wants to go to either England. She could go to either England, where she has a passport, or France, and they rarely extradite or not often extradite people. The other reason is this. She was living in the shadows when they arrested her, and she has every reason in the world at her age and facing these charges never to come back. So it could have been $220 million, and she would have been detained.
But here's the thing, Anna. I mean, if she was going to be guarded by armed personnel and they took away her passports, and this money didn't even seem to be all be put up by her, right? There were other benefactors that were going to put this bond package together. We don't know who they are. I believe some of their identities or all their identities are being kept secret. And yet, I'm curious, is Ghislaine Maxwell being treated in a very different way than anyone else, considering what happened to Jeffrey Epstein?
I mean, Jesse, I think you could argue that. I think you could make the argument that she is being treated a little bit differently in light of all the money that is planning on being put up for her to come back. But at the same time, I can understand the court's concern here. As Jean was saying, she has citizenship in multiple countries. And one of the things that the court looks at is to see if there's extensive ties to the community here. Ghislaine Maxwell has citizenship, as Jean was saying, in France and in England. And also, given the high-profile nature of these charges, I'm sure the court is considering whether there's any type of change in circumstances. What is the change in circumstances before with her initial detention hearing as opposed to now? Given the high profile of the nature of the case, given the fact that the court is very concerned that she would not come back even if she were to post that bond, I'm not surprised at all by the court's ruling here.
You talk about changed circumstances. Jean, she says that, look, I told you a lot more about my finances. I admitted I was married, and that's one of the reasons I'm going to stay here in New York. I have a husband. And yet that became an issue during this hearing as well. you know, because there was an allegation that they were going to ultimately get divorced. And so really, you're going to stick around for him? I thought that was an interesting back and forth about the husband.
Right. I'm hearing some background noise, but I think I heard your question. What happened with Miss Maxwell? She got too cute by half. She's trying to use the marriage as a sword and a shield. Before she got arrested, the marriage was just a scam. Now she's trying to use it as a shield to keep her from being detained. And the spouse, whoever he may be, he's being used and abused, in my opinion. I'm having a lot of noise here.
But all right, so we're going to work on that, Gene, because I want you to only hear me, all right? Because these questions are really everybody wants to know. And Anna, the problem is I guess this was interesting too. There's so much secrecy surrounding this case. And this order, this fuller order by the judge, isn't going to be released until both sides of the prosecution and her defense attorneys have an opportunity to do some redactions. What is being hidden? What do they not want the public to know at this point?
That's the million-dollar question, Jesse, and I'm wondering the same thing. My understanding is that there's some names, as you were talking about, possibly some other benefactors that are putting some money forward. Also, if you think about it, she was saying that she was going to stay here because of her husband, but what the government's position was that even if she were to be released, she said she was going to be staying with someone else, not even her own husband. And those names haven't been revealed. I can understand that there's some concern about privacy for some of these people who might be getting involved here who don't want anything to do with being in the public eye. But at the same time, if you're going to be involved in a case like this, it's understandable that if your name comes out, that it is going to be publicized and that people have a right to know.
And they were saying, her defense attorneys, look, you know, it's not a big deal that they were getting a divorce. She wanted to divorce him because of all the public pressure on her, all the attention. This was the right thing for their marriage. Look, I don't know the details of it. I just know she is going to stay locked up, seemingly by all accounts, until her trial. And there is a lot of time between then and that trial, between now and that trial. Who knows what will ultimately happen? I want to switch gears on a big story that you might have heard about. It's out of Florida. Well, actually, I should tell you, it's actually out of Illinois. A Florida man named Duke Webb. He was a decorated Green Beret. He served 4 tours in Afghanistan. He's been identified as the person who shot up a bowling alley in Rockford, Illinois, killing 3 people and injuring 3 others. Our very own Anjanette Levy has more.
Sadly, 3 people were killed. Another 3 were wounded Saturday night at this bowling alley in Rockford, Illinois. Police went to Don Carter Lanes after receiving a call of shots fired.
Within several minutes, the officers were able to locate what they believed was a suspect, and he was taken into custody without any officers firing their weapons. The suspect had attempted to obscure his identification and hide his weapons prior to the officers taking him into custody.
Now, police say this man, 37-year-old Duke Webb, is the shooter and that he had 2 handguns. He's an active duty member of the Army. He's a Green Beret, and he's stationed in Florida. Now, 3 men, ages 73, 65, and 69, were killed. A 14-year-old boy was shot in the face. A 16-year-old girl was treated and released from the hospital, and a 63-year-old man remains in critical condition. A GoFundMe page has been started for the family of one of the victims. Rockford's mayor says this has been a tragedy for the community. The shooting happened in the restaurant and bar area of that bowling alley.
The business district's meetings are actually held at Don Carter's. You think about the really numerous fundraisers that they host for nonprofits, probably one nearly every week of the year. They're hosting fundraisers for nonprofits or donating to a nonprofit. You think about all the birthday parties that all of us who live in Rockford have attended at Don Carter's. They've really been a staple of our community. They're a really well-run, locally owned business.
Now, sadly, this shooting happened as Rockford, Illinois was seeing a tremendous spike in gun violence this year. Duke Webb faces 3 counts of murder and 3 counts of attempted first-degree murder. A judge denied his request for bail, and his lawyer said to the judge today that he may have PTSD, but he has yet to be evaluated.
Okay, now, Gene, this is interesting. Really a tragic and horrible situation. Responding officers say this might have been a completely random act. as we know, his defense attorneys are suggesting that Webb may suffer from PTSD, memory issues. How would that factor into what happened here?
Well, it could be a defense of diminished capacity if you're trying to prove any premeditation or willfulness. You could probably argue diminished capacity and get any murder charge dropped down to a manslaughter charge because of his mental health. And I gotta say, if he was a Green Beret in the Army, and he still is in the Army, and it doesn't appear there's any motive, it looks like it could be PTSD.
Here's the problem with that, right, Anna? Because didn't he tell authorities where the weapons were? There was evidence that he was hiding the weapons. He admitted to what he did. That would seem to suggest he understands his actions. And doesn't that kind of conflict with a sort of mental health kind of defense?
That's precisely, Jesse, what the prosecution is likely going to argue here. You can't have your cake and eat it too, right? On one end, you're saying that I didn't know what was happening. I didn't have the capacity, nor did I have the intent to have any kind of premeditation or deliberation or to know what I was doing. And of course, the government, on the other hand, is going to argue, of course you did. You told the officers what happened in the sense that this is where the weapons were. This is what you were planning on doing. This shows intent. This shows planning. But to Gene's point, I agree. I think that if I'm the defense attorney here, you're doing whatever you can to see if you can try to use that mental health as a potential defense here in any way to try to get this from a murder to a manslaughter. And what I think is going to be key here, Jesse, is to see if there is a history of mental health illness. Is it one of those situations where all of a sudden you're saying it's mental health? Or is there some sort of history to document and to predicate that there may have been something there regarding PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, or what he was thinking at the time in order to attack the intent that is so imperative in murder cases?
And without speculating too much, it should be noted that I believe his last tour ended this past July. So it's not as if you have somebody, active service member. It's not as if, for example, he was serving 10 years ago or 15 years ago, but right now. Now, Gene, here's an interesting aspect. He's not like every other defendant, is he? Green Beret. There's a question, the state attorney says that this is going to remain their jurisdiction, but is this a case where it could go federal? The military might want to try this? I mean, how does that work between the state, federal, military? Where do we ultimately see this case being prosecuted?
Well, it's funny. I used to work in the Eastern District of Virginia. Quantico was part of our jurisdiction. And when crimes were committed on Quantico, Marine Base Quantico, that's military jurisdiction, but it's also federal. So there would be an agreement that the military would take it or the feds were. This bowling alley was not on a military base. So it's either state or federal jurisdiction, not military. That's number one. Number two, I would suspect, given it appears to be a murder with nothing else, I'm not trying to downplay it, murders and nothing else, probably will go state. But I want to add this. Diminished capacity is not an insanity defense. And Anna hit the nail on the head. It just says that you didn't have the requisite specific intent to commit the first degree murder or second degree. Therefore, it should be, jury, please find him guilty of manslaughter. Diminished capacity is a little different than an insanity defense.
Sure. And I'm glad you made that point. It's just interesting to think about nonetheless, when we're hearing these different pieces and parts of the story. Anna, speaking of which, there seem to be reports that, one, someone might have jumped off a building, and yet the chief of police has declined to discuss this, citing an ongoing investigation. We don't know the positive identifications of the victims. Again, the police chief said we'll release that information from the coroner's office when appropriate. What are these steps in the investigation before we learn more details about what happened at that bowling alley?
Right, that's an excellent question. I think there's so many pieces of the puzzle that still need to be solved here, especially if there was any kind of causal connection. Was this really a random act of violence, or was there some sort of connection between the defendant and the victims in this case? What was going on with someone allegedly jumping off? did that have anything to do with the actual murder involved? So there's so many different questions that we're all pondering, and it really doesn't surprise me that none of these facts are released yet, because of course law enforcement always keeps it hush hush during an ongoing investigation. So I'll be following this case to see what happens.
As will we. Yeah, this is definitely a case that we want to follow, a sad case nonetheless. But listen, when we come back, we're going to take a little bit of a different turn. Are any of you out there Survivors fans? Do you remember Jonny Fairplay? He's back in the news for all the wrong reasons. We'll be right back.
Final 7. Oh, dude, how's Grant?
Huh?
How's Grant? She died, dude.
Ah, Jonny Fairplay, the man that you love to hate, or maybe you just hate from Survivor, who famously lied about his grandmother dying so that he could win a reward. That's who we're talking about. Well, now he is accused of stealing from that same grandma. Can't make this story up. So Fairplay, whose real name is John Dalton, along with his mom, were arrested and charged with larceny for reportedly stealing furniture and an expensive necklace. And this necklace was worth reportedly $5,000, all stealing it from his grandma. Now, his mother, Patsy Hall, is accused of abusing this elderly woman who suffers from dementia. Gene, I'm going to start with you because I heard you in the break saying you hated him so much. When you look at their mug shots, it almost seems like they don't take this seriously or they think it's a joke. But these are some serious offenses.
You know what? I'm like a juror. I could not be objective. I could not stand him, but I'll try to be objective. He doesn't take it seriously, and his mother doesn't take it seriously. And I don't know if the mother is blood of Miss Cook, the grandma, but they abused her. She had dementia, and I got to tell you, these charges are very serious. They took advantage of an elderly woman, took her furniture, took money, jewelry. Worth about $5,000. And unfortunately, I live in Virginia. They were arrested in Danville, Virginia, on the south side of Virginia. So I don't feel too good about that.
Well, Anna, he said, this is Fairplay wrote this in a message to the Associated Press. We have been unjustly charged by a family member. I welcome the opportunity to vindicate myself and my mother. Because, of course, this was all brought to the attention of the sheriff's office by Fairplay's aunt. She's the one who made these allegations. These kind of cases, when you're dealing with family versus family, stealing, could they try to say this is all a misunderstanding? The grandmother told us we could take these items, and is that what ultimately becomes a he said, she said?
I mean, I think you could make that argument, Jesse, that of course they're going to argue. What is grandma talking about? We didn't do this. She gave us permission. She gave it to us. But are we not surprised here on this panel, Jesse and Gene? I mean, when you think about this guy was a villain on Survivor. What goes around comes around, right? So he was willing to make up this huge lie about grandma being dead back in 2003, and then come to show grandma's not dead, and now grandma is accusing you of theft and larceny and elder abuse. You know, keep in mind, this is the same guy who made up this lie, who admittedly made up this lie before. So, of course, jurors don't live under rocks here. They're going to remember him and the lie that he made. And, of course, what are we seeing now? The same type of crime, larceny, theft, things that don't reflect upon your veracity. And, of course, if you look at these mugshots here, another thing that the prosecution is going to argue is that, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, look at this. Pictures speak louder than words here. Are they taking it seriously? It looks like they're laughing about or smirking about it. So, of course, there's a lot of room here for the prosecution to argue, but I'm very curious to see what the defense is going to say here, especially if this case goes to trial. Was it really just a misunderstanding? I guess we'll have to wait and see.
And talking about him being a villain, I guess you're saying life imitates art, although I don't really think that's quite art, but you get what I'm trying to say. So, Gene, Anna brings up a good point. If this goes to a trial, will the 2003 incident be brought into evidence? Look at this guy. He lied to everyone. He lied to the nation. Although he did go, I think, on tape and say that, you know, he told the truth. His grandma's alive and well. But this idea of him lying and lying and lying, could that be brought in? Could we see this Survivor clip be brought into evidence?
No, but it would be part of jury selection because you would ask jurors, are they familiar with Survivor and what happened and all that? but it wouldn't come in a trial because it's not a conviction. It's not other crimes evidence. It was a silly thing on a silly show, Survivor. Although I was a big fan of Survivor, it was a silly show. And it was so far back, it would be considered unduly prejudicial. I will say this, at the trial, the key witness, in my view, will probably be the aunt who filed that complaint.
Yeah.
I would like to know if she has firsthand knowledge of the abuse and the scam allegedly that Jonny Fairplay and his mother, Patsy Hall, allegedly committed on the grandma, Miss Cook.
And here's another thing, an interesting thing to note. Based on his statement, they appear to be a united front as of now. Doesn't seem like he's saying, my mom told me to do this, or my mom misled me, or she misled, or he misled her. They seem to be united as of now, but what a case, what a case. All right, sticking with the world of entertainment, let's get serious for a second, because this one is really no joke. Jerry Harris from the Netflix series Cheer, he's pleaded not guilty to 7 sex crimes charges, including child pornography and exploiting and sexually abusing minors. This includes sodomizing or allegedly sodomizing a 15-year-old boy. Okay, Anna, he pled not guilty to this. This is shocking when it was announced. He is going to fight this. What do you make of the latest development?
Right, Jesse, very, very serious allegations here. And what's really alarming about this case is it's not just one minor who is making these accusations. It appears as though there's multiple minors who are making these accusations. And so what I'm really interested to see here is that one of the alleged incidents allegedly occurred at a cheer competition in a public restroom. And this 15-year-old minor is alleging that he was sexually assaulted by the defendant. Of course, what I'm wondering is if we're at a very popular and very crowded cheer competition in a public restroom, were there not any witnesses around? Did anyone not hear what was happening? Did anyone not see what was happening? So of course, if I'm the defense attorney here, I'm arguing and seeing what kind of investigation can we do here to see, does this claim make sense? Does it make sense? As egregious as the claim is, does it make sense based upon the evidence? I think that's going to be key when it comes to looking at every piece of evidence and dissecting what these witnesses are saying.
You know, he actually remains locked up in a federal detention center in Chicago without bond. His attorneys have said, Gene, that he should be released. It doesn't have a criminal history. He had a really tough childhood. And he himself was barely an adult when he allegedly committed these crimes. Now, the judge hasn't officially issued a decision on bail yet, but those arguments, what do you make of those?
They're not going to fly, and I'll tell you why. When you have a federal bond hearing under 3142 Title 18, did a lot of them. You look at the weight of the evidence, the nature of the crimes, danger to the community, risk of flight, the personal history. What's working against him is I think he has been charged with not just possession of child pornography, but production. And production is a 15-year mandatory minimum. Possession is a 5-year minimum. Oftentimes you'll see it pleaded down to 5 years. But you add the other stuff, which is luring minors. I would be shocked if the judge releases him, unless maybe he can come up with $22 million like Miss Maxwell. But even then, I think he or she would detain the defendant.
Anna, that might be true, what Gene just said. He might not be released. But do we get a sense of his defense if this goes to trial? Because in these cases, typically, I would imagine it's really hard to fight against when you have documentary evidence, images or content from, communications or from the computer. The sexual assault, like you said, could be a separate issue about how do we prove that. But a lot of these charges, you just look at the physical evidence of it. You look at the data. And I'm curious, these arguments that we heard about from his attorneys about detainment, trying to evoke sympathy in a way, can that factor into a trial later on against this man?
I think they're going to try to, if this case were to go to trial, Jesse, I think they're going to do their best to try to humanize him and provide a sense of this is a person, not just a name on a piece of paper or not just a defendant. But I think that what I gathered from what the defense was arguing here was more along the lines of mitigation and not necessarily whether this was a he did it or he didn't. Because you're right, in these kinds of cases, when I handle these kinds of cases, whether it's possession of child pornography or production, the documentary evidence is key. what was found on his computer? How did you do the forensic investigation around that? When you have the images, the actual images, and keep in mind, we don't know in terms of whether they were voluminous or how many, that is very difficult to try to overcome. And of course, that really goes down to the documents and the physical exhibits that the government can use if this case were to go to trial. So to that point, I really think the defense was trying to mitigate here. And again, if this case does go to trial, they will do their best to try to humanize him and show what kind of background he had, and of course, given his young age.
And Gene, it seems to me that some of the strongest evidence is going to be, or the accounts of these brothers, these twin brothers who have accused this man of sexual abuse back in 2018. So not that long ago. They were, I think, 13 years old. That's pretty fresh.
That's devastating. And Anna hit the nail on the head again. It's not just the verbal testimony that's going to win the day for the government if it goes to trial. And these 13-year-old are twins. It's not just their testimony, it's the corroboration. And Anna mentioned, is there documents, emails, texts? I don't think they have a wiretap. If they have corroboration of what these two young men will say, young boys will say, it's going to be a very hard row to hoe for the defense team.
Absolutely. Look, we're going to take a break. When we come back, I want to focus on another big development. This is out of California, and this has maybe major implications for pregnant women. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everybody. I want to bring your attention to a major update that really has a lot of implications. California's highest court has decided that it will not stop the prosecution of a mother who's been charged with the murder of her stillborn child, and she had been using meth when she was pregnant. In fact, the drug was found in the baby's system. Now, the state AG, Xavier Becerra, was fighting to have the charges dropped against 26-year-old Chelsea Becker, as he says that this case will have a chilling effect on pregnant women from coming forward seeking the help that they need. This is a lot. So I want to start right now. Anna, is Becerra right? I mean, do we have a situation where if there is a pregnant woman or a woman who's about to become pregnant, she has substance abuse issues, she won't come forward because of fear of getting prosecuted, and I'm curious what you think about this.
Jesse, this is a tough call. This is a very tough call because on one end, I can see where Becerra is coming from because, yes, he's correct in saying there could potentially be a chilling effect because if pregnant women see that there's a danger of potentially being prosecuted if they test positive and they're pregnant, then that could deter them from wanting to seek treatment and seeking the correct substance abuse treatment. But on the other hand, you can make the same argument saying that, well, if you don't do anything, and if we end up actually going forward with this prosecution, this sends a message to other pregnant women that, hey, you can't go to this length. You can't go to this length, not get help, and then feel that there's no consequences. Because, my understanding specifically regarding this particular defendant is that she had 3 children that were allegedly taken away from her from CPS. And in fact, I believe that one of those kids was born addicted to methamphetamine. And I believe he's 3 years old now. And that was one of the reasons as to why he was taken away. So of course, when you think about that, it's at what point is this going to stop? Are we going to just let this happen to the point where, the baby tests positive or the baby dies? Or is there going to be a stopping point? So this is such a tough call because I can see the arguments on both sides here.
Gene, let me ask you this. We have a situation where you can have a pregnant mother, uses substances, really strong drugs. It ultimately affects the child, kills the child. But could this lead to a slippery slope? Because this is an argument that we've heard since we've heard about this case where, okay, so now any mother who has a miscarriage, a stillborn, they're going to be investigated. What exactly caused this? What exactly did you do? Did you not do enough to protect your child, done enough to get the treatment? Because that's what we're hearing with this development.
Right. Well, there are actually 2 slippery slopes in my view. One is if you get a prosecutor who's a zealot, she or he's a zealot and believes in the sanctity of life, pro-life, they may take a very aggressive view on instances where the baby is stillborn. That's one slippery slope. There could be an abuse by the prosecution of enforcing this law. The other one is this. I'm on a board of a reentry program. It's for women, and they all have addiction issues. We have to learn this. addiction is a disease, whether you are pregnant or you are not pregnant as a woman. And if you are pregnant and you have addiction issues, that is a powerful force that can overcome the desire and the love that someone may have for their expected baby. So you got that tension there with the addiction. So that's the other slippery slope. It's a horrible case, but what hurts this defendant is she has instances in the past where she had 3 kids, they had to take her kids away. She's been sort of reckless in her behavior. That is not going to help her if it goes to trial.
What I don't understand, Anna, is why are we debating this? Why didn't the California Supreme Court take this issue up, decide it? Why did they just punt the football?
And I am asking myself the same question, and I don't know. I don't know the answer to that as to why the California Supreme Court did not decide to take on this case. But to Gene's point, he's absolutely right. Addiction is a disease, and it's not just a black and white, cut and dry answer. Oftentimes, even with my clients, I mean, you could lead a horse to water, you just can't make it drink, right? That person has to want to get the treatment in order for it to be successful. And we all know on this panel that the road to recovery for any addict is not a smooth one. There's always going to be ups and downs. So again, to what we were all saying in this panel is that there's so many arguments, pro and con, as to what to do about the pregnant women. But at the end of the day, something has to be done, either some other measures about getting treatment or whether it's a prosecution, something has to be done because the safety of the baby is of the utmost significance and importance here.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Gene, I just want to give you an opportunity to address what the court did here or did not do here. We could have gotten some clarity on this issue.
Well, I'm hard on judges. Sometimes they don't want to get any more involved in the situation than we do. So they kind of do the path of least resistance. And it appears that they did punt and they didn't want to address the issue head on. But it's a horrible situation. It is horrible. I would never want to be on the jury in this type of case.
Yeah, it's not an easy one either which way. And unfortunately, we don't have some answers from the California's highest court, unfortunately. All right, let's switch gears because we still do not have answers as to what happened to missing 3-year-old Nylo Lattimore out of Ohio after his mother, Nytisha Lattimore, was found stabbed to death. Ann Jeanette Levy is back to give us more on this case.
3-year-old Nylo Lattimore was last seen on December 4th. 8 days later, his mother's body was found.
We are concerned greatly for his whereabouts. We want the public to know we are doing everything as a police department to locate Nylo.
Police say Nytisha Lattimore was stabbed to death with an unknown edged weapon. Her body was found near a bridge over the Ohio River. A stroller Lattimore used for Nylo was found nearby. Lattimore's boyfriend, Deshaun Brown, is charged with murdering her. Volunteer search and recovery groups spent a day looking for any sign of Nylo along 21 miles of the riverbanks. Police say they're very concerned for Nylo's safety.
We are still looking for Nylo Lattimore to date. Please understand that. But growing concern has risen through our investigation and interviewing of Deshaun Brown, who has been charged with the death of Nytisha Lattimore. Growing concern to the point we feel that this event with Nylo may involve foul play. So we're asking anyone with information whatsoever to come forward.
A judge set Deshaun Brown's bail at $1 million, and he could face more charges after this case goes to the grand jury. For Law and Crime Daily, I'm Ann Jeanette Levy.
Anna, let's start with Deshaun Brown here. We have the guy who authorities say murdered this woman. If anyone's going to know what happened to Nylo, it's presumably him. What's going on in those conversations? What's happening behind closed doors? Because obviously he's asked about it, and yet he's not giving the answers, or maybe he says he doesn't know the answers to what we're all trying to figure out.
That's right, Jesse. I'm curious to see what Mr. Deshaun Brown has to say about this and whether he's giving any information as to Nylo's disappearance. Was he allegedly the only one involved, or was there other people involved? Is he pointing the blame at someone else? I mean, where could baby Nylo be? And of course, if I'm the prosecutor here, I'm trying to see, okay, is there a way that we can try to get some information from him? Maybe there's a deal that needs to be made. Maybe there's some negotiations that have to be done in order to figure out where this baby is. Because as you said, if the evidence supports that the prosecution of Mr. Brown, then where could this baby be? He clearly was close to the mom because the stroller was right there. So what other evidence can Mr. Brown provide? And I'm really interested to see if the prosecution is going to try to sweeten some sort of deal for him to give him an incentive to speak up and to tell where this baby allegedly is.
Yeah, Gene, at this point, it doesn't look good for, I mean, it really doesn't look like a happy ending, which way, you know, what we're dealing with at this point. We're all thinking the absolute worst. And the question is Deshaun, look, if he ultimately is involved in what happened to Nylo, let's say he killed Nylo, disposed of his remains, he's trying to work out some deal. You know, if I can provide the family some justice, some closure, I'll tell you where the remains are. Takes, you know, let's work out some deal here, what you're going to charge me. Or on the other hand, if he stays quiet, as Anjanette was saying, as Anna was saying, he could face additional charges even if we don't find Nylo's body. Could he still be charged in connection with Nylo's disappearance if we never even find Nylo?
Absolutely. In the Eastern District of Virginia, we had a famous case, United States versus Jay Lenz. It was an estranged wife, and they couldn't find a body. He was convicted of kidnapping resulting in murder. You don't need the body to prove murder. However, it is a reasonable doubt because somebody could still be alive, but you can do a murder charge without a body. It's just a little harder. I would like to know what forensic data they have against Mr. Brown to suggest that he may be connected to Natisha's death, but also to the Nylo, the son. I will say this. The stroller was found near where Natisha was found on the shores of the Ohio River, which suggests that the son, the young child, was nearby when her life was taken. I read the article on this. They searched 21 miles of that shore, and it appears that Nylo may have been put into the river or taken somewhere else. But the punchline is, at the end for this, is he will probably be given an incentive to alert the authorities to the location of the young boy in exchange for maybe 40 years, similar to what we're going to discuss in an upcoming case.
Yeah, good point, and that's a good preview to it. Before we do that, Anna, let me just ask you this. You know, it could be a situation where you leave the stroller there to make it look like the body is in the water, but yet you took the baby somewhere else, or you gave the baby to someone else. This becomes a situation where if you're having this intense search and you don't find the results, typically from the cases you've seen, what are we looking at in terms of the body?
Right. So it's really going to be dependent upon, as Gene was saying, the forensic data here and what evidence links Mr. Deshaun Brown to the disappearance of baby Nylo. Because you're right, it really could be. Maybe it's not what we think it is. Maybe it was a staged setup where something happened. They put the stroller there to make it seem as though the baby was with the mom at the time, but someone else has the baby. And so that's why I think it's so important to find out if Mr. Brown is going to talk, if there is some sort of incentive for him to talk, as to whether there's other people involved here. If there were other people involved, what was their involvement? How were they involved? How did they get to that? And what's also going to be interesting is to see if they do some sort of investigation on his cell phone. Was he text messaging other people? Can they triangulate or ping to find out if there's other people affiliated with this homicide, with this murder?
And let me just mention 3 numbers in case anybody out there has information. You call Crime Stoppers at 513-352-3040. You can call detectives at 513-352-6948 or 513-352-6934. All right, we'll take a break. When we come back, Gene just previewed our final case, and this one is a doozy. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everybody. Well, we seem to have an answer, an unfortunate answer, as to what happened to missing Florida woman Gretchen Anthony. Her husband, David Anthony, has confessed to murdering her and led authorities to her body. In fact, when she first disappeared, he apparently tried to misdirect investigators by sending texts from Gretchen's phone saying she was in the hospital fighting coronavirus. Now, he pled guilty to second-degree murder and he has agreed to a sentence of 38 years in prison. Gene, I'll start with you because you mentioned it in our last part of the show. I'm surprised at what we're listening to here. In exchange for telling authorities where the body is, he'll agree to spend 38 years in prison for a conviction that would normally carry life in prison. What do you think about that?
Well, life in prison, if not the death penalty. It's Florida, so he dodged a bullet. His defense attorney or defense attorneys, they should get gold stars on steroids. This is a great plea deal for this defendant. All right, he killed his wife, tried to hide it. It was premeditated. It was out of anger, passion, whatever. He may have had a life insurance policy on her. And all he had to do was point the body in the direction of the authorities, or point the authorities in the direction of the body, and he got 38 years. I know drug dealers who get 38 years. This was a great deal for him. Now, if I were a prosecutor, I don't know Dave Ehrenberg, I know of him, but I think this was good for the family, and they probably agreed to the plea deal. They would rather find their daughter than have him get sentenced and go away for life. So this really helped both sides, but the defendant got a great deal.
Yeah, as you said, Dave Ehrenberg, the Palm Beach State Attorney, he said that the family wanted a proper memorial and burial. They did not know where their daughter was. Are you surprised, Anna, that we're dealing with a situation where he actually pled guilty or not? Because everything that I've seen in this case seems to suggest if this went to trial, the defense would have had a really, really tough time, because so much of what happened was apparently caught on surveillance footage, including at the home, at this medical center, parking the car. The dogs found the smell of decomposition. What do you make of what the actual evidence is against Dave Anthony?
Jesse, I think that's part of the reason why he decided to take the deal that he did, because the evidence from what we know seems overwhelming. And a lot of people can argue, well, it's circumstantial at best, but remember, there's jury instructions that say circumstantial evidence is treated the same as direct evidence. In this day and age, there's so much that can be caught on video that people don't even think about or they're not necessarily aware about, whether it's the Ring doorbell or, the doorbell that has the surveillance from the patio, the neighbor surveillance. He was tracked at every point in time, and he probably didn't even realize that was happening. And I 100% agree with what Gene was saying, is that his defense attorneys did an excellent job here, because, again, to walk away with a punishment of 38 years, second-degree murder, not first, but second-degree murder, with the caveat that he cannot be charged with additional charges, or that he can't be charged with any more charges. I mean, that's a fantastic deal for him, especially, like you were saying, in light of the evidence that we've seen and the outcome in this case. And of course, for the family, this provides some closure. And of course, I've read that the prosecutor was saying, this is information we didn't have. He led us to the body. The victim's family wanted proper closure, and they wanted a proper burial service. So I think that this was a resolution that was a win for everyone, both the prosecution and the defense.
Gene, what's interesting is that we have so many of these cases where there's a couple in the middle of a custody dispute, they're in the middle of a divorce, which was happening here, and we see this motive to kill, we see these opportunities happen, and yet how incredibly sloppy was this guy who tried to think he was a mastermind, tried to misdirect investigators by saying, taking her phone, saying she was in the hospital fighting coronavirus, but yet he left a trail that ultimately came back to him. I see that so many times on Law and Crime.
Okay. Most criminals are not that smart. They think they're smart, but they're not that smart. If they were so smart, they wouldn't be getting caught. But this guy gets the stupid award because he was caught on video parking her car in a parking lot. He was caught on video reaching at the camera to shut it off in the garage. He was using her phone to send bogus texts as if she were alive. And then he took her phone and he was pinged, I think, in Texas. So this guy gets the stupid award.
Yeah, that's one way of putting it. And look, he'll be behind bars, and that's the important thing. We now have some resolution for her family. It's clearly not the result that they wanted, but literally this is just maybe at this point the best they can hope for, some closure and an answer to where he's going to be for the next over 3 decades. Anna Yum, Gene Rossi, thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate you taking the time. Everybody, thank you out there for joining us. We'll be back tomorrow, 12 p.m. Eastern. See you then.